first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the cybercrime forensic presentation, followed by the AGM. We will be recording the presentation by Andrew Moore, which I'll introduce you to shortly. But we won't be recording the questions, and we won't be recording the AGM that follows. Can I actually ask you to keep your cameras and your microphones off during the presentation, because it gives a better quality of the points. But if you could, we have somebody in the waiting room. Okay. If you could actually put down your questions in the chat. So anybody's got any questions you want to develop en route, so we won't stop the questions en route until Andrew's actually finished his presentation. But if you put them down in the chat, and then Andrew can pick them up at that stage at the end and we have a look at them. The other thing, just to actually make us a little bit more friendly, what I'd like to suggest you do in the chat area, just to actually say where you are. So I'll start you off. I'm in Bournemouth, on the south coast of the UK. So it's rather nice to actually see where everybody is. My goodness, from Chile, Kent, Italy, wow, Switzerland, London, Suffolk, Cambridge, Cyprus, London, Scotland, Bristol, Exeter, Canada, Winnipeg, wow, Guernsey, my goodness me, Wales, my goodness me, we are really an international group. New Zealand, wow, Gloucestershire, Derbyshire, West Sussex, north of Scotland, Brighton, my goodness me. This is absolutely spectacular. I've never seen such a widespread. Aberdeen, Buckinghamshire, Ireland, Cambridge, Northern Ireland. Wow, that is very impressive. Syed, I don't know whether you've got any way of picking up those ones and be able to copy them. If you can, be fantastic. Don't worry if you can't. But it's very impressive to know, particularly where the overseas ones are coming from. This is spectacular. So at that stage, what we've actually got, I've spoken to Andrew, and afterwards he's happy for the slides to be put up, so you can actually see the slides again afterwards. And in addition, when it's so the slides will go up maybe in a week's time, but the the video of his presentation probably will take maybe 3 weeks or so before that becomes available, and then it will actually be on the BCS YouTube area, and also it will actually be on the event, so that you can actually see it then. So at that stage, I think we'd like to actually welcome everybody, remind everybody, please put your questions in the chat, and keep everything switched off apart from Andrew, and literally once we get going. So at that stage, I think that I would actually ask Andrew if you would like to share screen, and we'll start your presentation. And thank you very much. This sounds a very, very interesting presentation. Just actually for the record, 198 people have registered to attend. So,
damn, so close to that 200.
200, wow. Anyway, in which case I'd like to introduce Andrew and leave you to Karen, giving you further introduce yourself. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, very nice to see you all, and thank you very much for coming. So my name is Andrew Moore. I'm a lecture practitioner at Anglia Ruskin University. I've been a consultant in industry for a number of years in different jobs between digital forensics, e-discovery, and whatnot. I'm also a consultant for a Cambridge startup, Upprobe. And yeah, I've been in multiple different roles. I've been a technical writer for OWASP for one of their summits. So yeah, quite a lot of things. All right, so I'm going to give you a little presentation on, cyber forensics and the various flavors of that. All right, so let me just make my thing go full screen, and we should be good to go. And yep, hopefully you guys can see that okay, I'm assuming. Okay. Oh, and I need this computer. Okay, so again, a quick little bit of intro about myself. So again, I've consulted in digital forensics, e-discovery, and academic roles over the last 8 years. I'm currently the course leader of the BCS Honours Digitech in Cyber Network and Software. It's a degree, the full term is Digital Technology Solutions degree. But yeah, so we cover cyber network and software for apprenticeships. So for people who are trying to get into a role in industry. So you go to an employer, get a job, you get your degree with us, and it doesn't even cost you any money. So, you know, student debt. So yeah, I consult for BotPro with Cambridge startup. I've worked in a range of UK and EU projects from Cyber ASP to ECTEG, which is the educational arm of the European Commission. I hold certifications such as the Certified Forensic Investigation Practitioner and the Certified Cyber Incident Responder at Distinction through 7SAFE, and I have a BC Honours in Information Security and Forensic Computing. In my spare time, I play some guitar, I play football, and a lot of computer games when I can get the moment. All right, enough about me. Let's get to why you're here. So I'm going to make this talk a little different, I suppose, rather than quite lectury. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what digital forensics actually is, various flavors, that kind of thing. And then we're going to go straight into advice, skills, building a home lab, evidence samples, free software, learning resources. So really to get you going. And I think that's the best way. And it'll hopefully keep you engaged throughout the presentation. I'll also do a demo on something called prefetch files. It's a very short demo. It's about 1.5 minutes long. I'll start and stop it and talk through it. I may have to kind of jiggle the presentation around a little bit whenever I have to play the video. So I do apologize if it looks a bit janky. All right, so let's get going. All right, fancy slides. So first up, what is digital forensics? Because, you know, in case you are new and you thought it seemed like a really good idea to come tonight. So digital forensics is the practice of identifying, extracting, and considering evidence from digital media, such as computer hard drives. So even though the computer hard drives contain data, it isn't simply the only thing that contains data. This can be anything from Fitbits on your wrists, for example. It could be telemetries in a car to see where you went, when you hit the brake pedal, when you opened your door. Smart cars have all this information built into them. So it's quite interesting. Digital evidence itself is also both fragile and volatile, fancy words, and they require the attention of a certified specialist to ensure materials of evidential value can be, and then extracted, isolated, dealt with in a very scientific manner, and will stand up to scrutiny in a court of law. So effectively, if there was a phone and it was turned on, data is always changing on that phone. The phone will be looking for Wi-Fi signals, getting updates from applications, and these things are, further and further adding, shall we say, noise to the song that you want to find or listen to. So yeah, it's quite an interesting conundrum. So we have to make sure we get evidence as quick as possible. We also have to be specific as possible. And we have to make sure that what we do, we write it down, we make sure that it's repeatable, and we make sure then it can't be questioned or challenged from maladministration, for example, or due process when it comes to court. So as a quick bit, there's various police reports out there about digital forensics and various places. I chose one that I read sometimes, is the Police Foundation. So they say it's the importance of digital forensics as a core capability within policing and the criminal justice system cannot be overstated. And I say here that it's true. Many potential crimes, because we don't know the crimes until we've investigated them, have some form of digital evidence to be analysed. And again, this could be CCTVs, phones, Fitbits, cars, as I alluded to earlier. It's also not easy to assess the public value delivered by digital forensics for a number of reasons. So even though that you might have digital forensics officers, they get paid a reasonable salary, we always have to make sure that we try to understand why we have them, but also, what value do they give to a case? So there's no consolidated picture of the value generated by digital forensics. Typically because X officer or X digital forensic civilian doesn't equal X amount of convictions. It isn't quite like that. You may also even work on a case, get all the evidence you need, and then your suspect takes a plea deal, for example. So the work you've done kind of has been for nothing in that sense. And it's also an area of constant change and flux. There's a little academic research on the impact of digital forensics work. So there's a lot of forensic work in digital forensics, especially in white papers in industry or maybe even academic work, but it changes quite often. And the technique that worked, say, 3 years ago may no longer work, or the technique might still work, but the software you use doesn't work. And from then you get a lot of kind of misinformation and whatnot. So it can be a bit of a minefield to start off with. Later reports state the benefits to the public, however. So of course, swifter justice, because early identification of offenders, speedier exoneration of innocent suspects. I'm sure you all have seen in the media about the amount of cases, WhatsApp text messages and that kind of stuff. Getting that stuff immediately can exonerate people and get them out of the investigation, so the police actually focus on their job. And it works the same way. It also makes sure that a certain suspect can be the prime suspect in that regard. Prevention of potentially large numbers of future crimes by supporting and identifying the conviction in court and prolific offenders. So in other words, just because there's a large number of crimes someone may commit or whatnot, if we can identify them early, then hopefully they won't actually commit those crimes, which is also very key. And in general, the reduction of investigation times, allowing for police to actually do more work. Because at the end of the day, if we can break down the number of cases that are actually coming in, then obviously they get a better chance to focus on what they're doing. So what kind of professions actually come through this? Now, cyber forensics in itself is a flavor of digital forensics, so specifically to cybercrime itself. But there are many different types, and cybercrime forensics, in a sense, could be applied to pretty much all of these. So, for example, we have data recovery. So if you're recovering data from a damaged device, and that could be a CCTV camera that got firebombed, that could be a hard drive that got smashed, or it could just be a memory card that may have, got a static discharge on it and it doesn't work anymore. It's quite an interesting role. It doesn't have to be crime related, but it also can be crime related. E-discovery, another thing that I've done. So based on something called the EDRM, this stands for the Electronic Discovery Reference Model. To put it in a broad term, it takes a bunch of data from, say, a client and from hundreds of PCs, maybe even thousands of PCs, and we are going to condense all of that data down. We're going to go out and collect that data. We then cull that data. Culling simply is we remove the data that is unnecessary. We would find deleted documents, Excel documents, Word, PowerPoint, and so on and so forth, or videos, music. After that, it would be uploaded to our e-discovery platform. That platform would then be checked through a bunch of legal reviews. So you would have reviewers doing multiple passes on these documents that were uploaded to see if they're relevant or not relevant. And this would be by paralegals, judges, police, lawyers, fire brigade, ambulance service, take your pick. At which case, eventually you go from quite literally thousands of documents, potentially even deleted documents, all the way down to 3 or 4 that are relevant for a court case. So it's quite cool. It's also not the most technical one out of all of these either, because there's a bunch of jobs in the EDRM that you can actually go for. So you could be a reviewer. You could be the person who deals with the matters themselves. You could be the person in collections. You could be the person in information governance at the beginning of the contract when they're signed. And there's plenty of places where you could work there. You've also got mobile forensics. Mobile forensics is somewhat of a minefield in digital forensics in general, purely because if you think about it, there is like a couple of operating systems that are typically used, Windows-based ones, you've got Macs ones, and you've got various flavors of Linux, but usually popular ones. Now look at Android. There is so many different forks of Android. So you've got stock Android, and then you've got like, Samsung's version, Google's own version, you've got Huawei's version, and you've got all these third-party vendors, they function very differently at times, different features. Some have hardware encryption, some don't. So Samsung have Samsung Knox, for example, which keeps the phone encrypted whenever it's turned off. And of course, Apple. And Apple are notoriously hard to get into, purely because any issue typically you find for, say, jailbreaking an iPhone, we would use that not to jailbreak the iPhone per se, but so we can run our forensic software and get the specific parts of the phone which are not normally allowed to get into. And that will give us the evidence that we actually potentially might want. This also applies to tablets as well, because simply it's just a bigger phone at the end of the day. We then have some called network and cloud forensics. So again, this could be e-crime potentially, but it also works for network devices. So what they do, how they function, what information can you get from them? We have internet investigations. Again, this could be anything from social media kind of work, all the way to ethical hacking kind of working on those types of teams. And then, of course, cloud providers. So it could be anything to do with AWS, the Amazon Web Services, or it could be something like Azure, which is Microsoft's platform. And again, their own specialized areas. You've also got something called malware forensics is what I do. So malware is malicious software, and it's usually caused to, or built to create havoc on people. And this can be in the form of a virus, a rootkit, a Trojan, a worm, various flavors. It's really cool. It's something that I didn't learn earlier in my life, but when I went to work at a previous company, I really started to get my eyes opened up to this kind of thing and how much of an actual problem it is. So if you're a software developer right now, for example, or you're just in GCSEs or A-level and you're learning a little bit about software, learning a little bit about malicious code and how it actually functions is really, really good for your development. And then, of course, we've got IoT forensics, known as the Internet of Things. There's many definitions of the Internet of Things, but effectively, from what I'm aware of, it's a bunch of devices that can simply connect to each other in a common way. And again, I say a bunch of devices that could be anything from sensors on an oil refinery all the way to your Amazon Alexa in your house. It could be Samsung Smart Things that you might use to connect to your TV, or the Philips Hue bulbs that you might have in your house to change the colors of lights in your house through Bluetooth. It could be a wide variety of those things. So yeah, these are kind of the areas. There are others, but I could spend through all night doing that. So hopefully one of them was interesting to you as such. What I plan to do now is have a little look through the types of jobs and how you can start and where you start from and how you can go to these roles. And then I'll talk about the common skills of how you kind of need for these roles. Okay. So typically starting areas, because end of the day, you're not in forensics currently. How do I get there? So most people in forensics start as an analyst or a technician. They don't sound like very awesome names, but trust me, there's a lot of technicians and analysts who are considerably smarter than I am. So though they're shown differently through many industry buzzwords, they could be seen as normally there's like a grading system, but typically your company could start an analyst, then consultant analyst, then consultant. Then you could be a senior consultant, principal consultant. Some companies, the lowest rank they have is consultant. So it really depends what company you're with. Some even have very odd names like defense specialist, where digital forensics is nothing to do with defense. It's about, finding artifacts or finding historical actions on a computer that we can go, oh, this person at this time did this in a scientific manner. So yeah, there's quite a lot you can look through. In the police, you typically have a job in something called the high-tech crime unit. And Bedfordshire is our closest one, because I'm in Cambridge. And again, there's a link there in the presentation to the Bedfordshire slides. There's the ICAT team, CCIT, or the DFIT team. Some are specifically to do with younger people. Some are to do with social media. And some of them are general digital forensics. Other non-civilian based ways. So if you happen to be a police officer currently, or you're aspiring to be, you're maybe doing an investigative studies degree, then becoming a police officer first is a good way of getting in, because once you've done your initial work as an officer, you can simply internally move to a position that's open in a high-tech crime unit, because you naturally have CPD, or continual professional development, that you can do. Of course, this also applies to the military. Once you've done your initial work in the military, you can always specialize in something. And again, consulting is another direction. Now, you can go into consulting and you may need to be slightly further in your development for this type of job, but it does vary widely between employers. So yeah, but of course, we'll help on this later on. So I hope I gave you kind of some form of insight to where you might end up starting with, and then the other areas, how you branch out. Now, let's have a look at advice for getting started. So, education. Education is important. I'm in education. I've been in education for, I think, about 11 years now, actually, and 8 years after uni plus 3 years of uni. So yeah, about 18 years, we'll call that, as far as higher education goes. So typically, what do you need? Employers are looking for something like a digital forensics and information security degree. I mean, it's in the name, right? I did one. You've also got cybersecurity, because cybersecurity may likely have some digital forensics modules. You can also have computer science, because you might learn some programming, networking fundamentals, all the basics. And of course, this would then include networking, because you typically would learn networking on a networking degree. And you would also learn some programming and some security. Now, you've also got people who may be in investigative studies degrees or criminology. And again, these are valid degrees for this type of career path. You may, however, require a small top-up in computing, depending on the structure of your degree pathway taken. So, in other words, if your course doesn't have a digital forensics module, for example, you may need to do a little extra work to get into this kind of area, if it's something you want to do. Additionally, GCSEs and A-levels containing computing and math is always very good. Some people have asked me, is science important? And I go, I mean, it's not important. But if we're talking about stuff you would use specifically, then obviously computing and math is usually a good option. So yeah. Now, fundamentals are key. And I mean, this has bit me many times in the past. I always kind of thought to myself, oh, look up there and think, I want that job. And I just actually start just learning what they do in that job and actually doing the work and understanding how it functions and build up my own little lab. But then whenever I found it very difficult to learn some of the stuff because my fundamentals weren't quite where they needed to be. So the fundamentals are very key, and we'll go about that in the technical part of the hard skills. So my advice is to start in one place and build up your knowledge before moving on. So say if we were looking at digital forensics, I would suggest looking at Windows. Windows' file system called NTFS, the New Technology File System. It hasn't changed in like 10 years. So Windows has changed above it, but the file system has largely remained the same. So because of that, it's really, really good to kind of learn. So what you're learning on one of them may apply to the other versions of Windows. Now, things move and operating systems have extra features, remove features, but your core understanding will still be there. After which, then you move to other operating systems. So again, as I said, there's many versions of Android. If you wanted to be a mobile forensic investigator, I recommend starting with Android. It's a lot easier than Apple-based devices or iOS. And again, you could always look at Linux. There's multiple distributions of Linux. And Apple's a funny one with computers themselves, because the software required to use them, like Macquisition or Black Bag, they're quite expensive and they really only work with Macs. So unless you're planning on doing like specifically only Mac forensics, I don't recommend this as the starting point. But of course, something you could do at a later date. Another thing which hopefully doesn't put anyone off is that depending on the employer you take or go on with, you will need to pass some form of security checks. Typically, this would be known as a Scotland Yard baseline check. So it kind of works out if you're an honest person and that you have, whatever you've typed in, your police records, so the police national database says, I have no criminal convictions that would not bias me in my job. So again, that's a good start. SC is quite common for consulting-based work. It lets you see up to secret level clearance work for the UK. So if you're like on X-list sites. SC stands for security cleared. Typically, it's to work out if you are susceptible to corruption or bribery. So if you have money problems and stuff like that, student loan, forgiven because everyone has a student loan, including myself still, taking 8 years on. After which you've got more specialized things such as CTC, which is the counterterrorism clearance. It's specific to different types of job, more into extremism and that kind of stuff. Again, there are checks to make sure you haven't got any affiliations, you haven't been in another country that you can't explain why you're in that country. It might be on the watch list, for example. And then the top one being DV, developed vetting. Police officers may have this. It lets you see top secret, instead of just secret for SC, it's top secret information from the UK government on excellent sites. Again, you can't ask for this, you have to be offered to take said thing. Again, hope it doesn't put anybody off. The processes are pretty straightforward. They obviously get a little more stringent as we go up the tier line. So yeah, if you wanted to know any more information about it, I've got a link there. So when you guys get the slides, you can have a look through. Now, as far as advice, as in like physically, Andrew, what can I do? You need a home lab. I think it's a fundamental requirement. Now, what I mean by a home lab, it means that it's something that you can test all the software on. You can have a look through all of these different types of information. You can look at some evidence. You can, build up a portfolio, which I'm going to come on to. Because I originally believed that portfolios for people who did art. And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. And then later on, I realized that whenever I was looking at students, hiring phases with students, or being in the hiring phase myself, some people were interested in what work I'd done. But the problem is a lot of this kind of work is NDA, non-disclosure type work. So you can't just say what you've done, what companies you work with, or whatnot. Your contract usually forbids you from doing so. So if you had a portfolio that showed the latest and greatest things that you can do, and it was the basics, I built my own home lab. Here is my environment. Here are the specific digital forensics-based things that I have learned. Here are the artifacts and windows that I understand, what they do and what they mean. Here is me taking them apart, and you can have a little portfolio built up. And I've seen people come to me with like little files and everything, and all look really nice and laid out, and it shows me things about that person, that they're detail orientated, they have an investigative mindset, which is extremely important. And this would be more prevalent on like investigative studies degrees or criminology degrees and a computer science degree. So you will have that mindset kind of almost drilled into you because it's part of your degree. So yeah, a home lab is very important. And don't worry, I go through what a home lab is and kind of how they work later on. So don't worry about that. And again, it can be locally virtualized or cloud-based. So I say locally virtualized, where it's like a little, think of like a sandbox. You have your operating system and another operating system inside of your computer. You play on this operating system, install your tools, do all your fun things. And once you're done with it, you just close it down, and then you go back to your normal PC. And it's really, really handy. But I'll go into more details about that later. And finally, cloud-based. So if you haven't got a fancy computer or something reasonable, or maybe just a tablet or a phone, maybe it's all you have, then maybe cloud might be a better solution for you. Although I would say cloud can cost a bit of money, especially if you use AWS or Azure. There is student credits available for those kinds of things. So if your organizations are part of the Azure Academy, or if they have an AWS kind of affiliation, then it might be a good option to talk to your people you either are being taught by, or school, or your college, university. Maybe they'll give you something to help in that regard. So again, quickly, let's touch on the portfolio. So this can amount to a portfolio that you can show and demonstrate to an employer about your current skills and interests. This way, you're something known as a known quantity, and they know what you need training-wise. And I had a comment from a colleague many years ago that I remember, it's like, if this is how driven they are by themselves, imagine what they'd be like with professional training and guidance. So, showing the initiative is definitely the best way forward. So it is, because everyone gets a degree, eventually, or everyone has a degree. It's quite common nowadays to have a degree, honors degree, master's degree. But once you get into the interview room, what can you show? What can you do? And a portfolio is a fantastic way of doing that. especially when you start in the work, you actually have to build your own sandbox environment to do all the work in anyway. So if you know how to do that at the beginning, you're going to have a really nice, smooth sailing start to your work. All right, common and soft skills. So, and I say it would be ideal if you were able to. So I honestly know that not everything will apply to everyone, but these are the common skills between the previous jobs that we looked at. So you should be able to work in a team. Teams are very important. I mean, you'll hear this from anywhere, from a fast food restaurant to a shop to any kind of high-end business. You must be able to work in a team and get on with people, even if you don't like them. Also in forensics, you have to be able to work by yourself. It's very, very important. You might be on a team, but you will have your own specific jobs that only you're dealing with. There'll be some team-focused jobs, obviously, but not everything will be team-focused. So you have to be able to work on your own, manage your own time, and so on and so forth. Now, taking notes is very important. Now, again, as I said, the fundamentals, not understanding earlier in my career, bit me. So hopefully this won't bite you. So build a user guide for tasks when shown and refer to them when stuck. I only wish that I did this many, many years ago. So for example, I had some colleagues who showed me something and it made total sense when it was in front of me. And you know, yeah, I'm not stupid. I understand how that works. Okay. And then they ask you to do it 20 or 30 times for different cases. And then it's like the second or third thing and you do, oh, what was I meant to do again? And I don't want to mess this up. So I'm going to ask them again. So if I just had a guide and I read everything down piece by piece, then it wouldn't have been a problem. And if you turn it into some formal documentation, so you know, this is the guide, depending on your employer, they may have that already built for you or they might not. Just go to the assumption that they don't. So whenever you make your notes, they're like, you know, your notes and you don't want to lose your notes. But it will save you a lot of headaches. So it will. Forensics also typically early on in your career, you'll be in something called collections, meaning that you'll go and collect the data from places, and, you know, copy it so you can analyze it at a later date. So traveling is quite key to this job. So sometimes you can do remote collections. What that simply means is that you sit in your office, you connect to the client's PC remotely through like a VPN, for example, and then you take the information from that, and that's you. Sometimes, however, that's not possible due to various issues. So you may have to travel to America or across Europe or to the rest of the world. In which case that, you know, you have to be comfortable doing that. You may be going by yourself. You may be going with some people. Early on, you'll go with other people because, you know, the company's not going to send you off by yourself, right? Hopefully. But later on, you'll be doing it by yourself, likely, if the job's not particularly big. And as I said earlier, managing your own time is very key. So you might get involved in different cases at any given time. In my own roles, you know, I've got an academic role to worry about, a course leadership to worry about. I have over 200 students a trimester to worry about. And then, of course, I've got my professional work, my professional business work on top of that, and our various pieces. And then life. So managing your time is very important. And, of course, interacting with clients or law enforcement directly is also very important. Like, I myself, there's like a stigma in like computing in a sense over the years where, you know, nerds like myself have a very hard time with talking to people. And I'm quite the opposite. I love talking to people. I even talk them to death sometimes. But some people aren't like that. And they have to be comfortable with talking to law enforcement or clients. Typically, this could be through emails, this could be face-to-face, or it could be over the phone, depending on what the specific need or matter is. But yeah, just make sure everything's documented. So these are the actions, we're going to take them, everyone agreed to them, then you go do them. And if you have any issues with talking to people in like either a public forum or just a private forum, then try to get some help, you know. So yeah, be worth it, I promise. As far as the hard skills, the kind of techie, nerdy stuff, a good understanding of the current legislation is very important. So there is many laws, but I just picked out a few. So RIPA, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, it's very important to know. You can ask suspects to divulge keys to their devices, provided you can prove the device is theirs. Very important, along with working out if the if you can survey somebody with a warrant from a magistrate, because obviously stalking someone's legal, but if you do it through a warrant, it's different because you legally have power to do so. And of course, the interception of data is also a specific section on that as well. You also have PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So it specifically states like people's rights when they're detained, or what specifics are around that. So it's always good to understand that. We also have the Computer Misuse Act, 3 specific sections under Section 3. There's Z and ZA, how they're labeled, about if there are different penalties to different levels. So if a person had made say you jump onto a friend's computer and you do something on their Facebook, technically that's a breach of the Computer Misuse Act because you didn't get permission to do that. Later on offenses could be like if you try to jump on their PC to create further offenses, or even further, again, another penalty if you try to damage their computer or damage other computers in that process of that crime. So it's always worth understanding that. And finally, the one that I'm sure you all must have came across, it's the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. And again, it specifically talks about what is considered personal data, such as IP addresses, and of course your name, date of birth, where you live. It's very important to understand this because when dealing with people's data, we have to make sure it's very specifically safe. And when we don't need it anymore, it's destroyed. You also have to have a good understanding of the current ISO regulation and the international standards that we need to adhere to. Pretty much every organization you'll come across should have the 27001 certification about information security and how we keep our information secure. So we don't keep things we don't need. We make sure we have good practice. We have an instant response plan if an incident happens or we get hacked, stuff like that. You may also hear this being said as the 27K family or the 2700 family, because there's more than number 1, as you might imagine. There's also a specific forensic one. It's called 17025. If you want to do police work in your lab in a private firm, you have to have the certification typically. All it means is that data can travel from one forensic lab to your forensic lab and your forensic lab to another, because you have similar acceptable standards that an auditor has looked at and verified that this is good enough for court, your documentation's in place, your staff are trained well, so on and so forth. And then finally, ACPO. The ACPO is specific to 4 principles about number 1 being don't change original data, because you shouldn't change original data because there's no need to usually. Number 2, if you do need to change original data, you have to explain your actions in court. For example, if you're dealing with a live phone, we're always going to have different data, always. And it's always going to change every second. You do it 10 seconds later than you should, or 20 seconds later than you should, that phone's data is going to be different. So we need to be aware of that. Principle 3 is make sure it's a paper trail so that anyone who looks at your work and goes, I don't believe that's that, they can verify your work because they can go through the same steps you did to get the same answer. And then finally, number 4, the main officer who is in charge of it is, or in charge of the investigation is overall responsibility. So in theory, if you look at it, it's not just your fault if you screw up, it's also their fault as well. So they should be putting you in a situation where you're likely to have an issue. It all comes to competency, like how competent you are in doing something. And competency always comes in 2 things, training and experience. And if you haven't got both of those things, you shouldn't be working with live evidence, at least not heavily supervised to start with. Another thing is not to be afraid of command lines. I've taught a lot of students over the years in various different degrees, computing and non-computing, and they've said to me like, oh, why do we use command lines? Why can't this be easier? And I agree, it could be easier. It could be. But at the same time, the software providers who will make it easier for you remove something. And that something is, how much knowledge you need to do the task. And that's a problem because whenever you get too fixated on a piece of software, you're now becoming almost like this button, you push it and it works. You don't know why it worked, but it worked. And that's all you need to know. In this scenario, we don't want that to happen. That's bad. What we want to happen is you specifically are able to explain your actions And if that magical software that you have doesn't work or failed, or you just simply don't have it in your new job, what do you do? So we need to make sure that you have a good fundamental understanding about processes and how things work piece by piece, rather than just being, shackled to one piece of software. If you haven't got it, then, you can't do your job. So learning stuff from the command line is very important. I'm going to show some command line stuff shortly. Quick little video. It'll be good. It'll be good. You've also got PowerShell. Now, these are found in Windows. PowerShell is probably the strongest administration tool that has ever been given to a user by Microsoft. It looks like the command line, but it's blue. And it can make you effectively control all the Windows from one little terminal. It's quite scary, even other computers from that terminal. So yeah, there's a lot of great functionality that comes with that the standard command prompt doesn't have. So it's definitely worth checking out. We also have the terminal. It's also similar to CMD and PowerShell, but it's found in Linux specifically. And again, you've got one for Mac as well. You also need to have a good understanding of networking. At the end of the day, we're in a very connected world. Your phone or your laptop that you're looking at this right now on, it's connected to something. It's connected to your router downstairs. It's connected to your internet service provider, your ISP, like Virgin, BT, AOL. That's connected to the autonomous systems to run their data across to the internet. And then in reverse for, I guess technically to this laptop where you're viewing it on. So having a good understanding of what an IP address is or an internet protocol address is, ports, very specific, so you can understand some security and what's happening on a certain port. So if this port's open, this data comes in, what's it mean? Is it emails, for example? We have protocols as well, which are very important. We have the OSI and the TCP/IP models. They're like a stacked model that simply shows theoretically how data moves from layer to layer. It's very important to understand because it'll give you a really good understanding of how a network is actually built up. And of course, devices and the function of those devices on a network. That's extremely important. In all my jobs, I came across a lot, and I really would say a lot, of devices that I've never seen before. And I feel like I'm quite a nerd, especially in this kind of area. So yeah, manufacturers never heard of. It could be these foreign devices that might look like an Android phone, kind of similar to like a Samsung, but it's not. And then you might have issues because all of your software doesn't recognize it, or it has bits missing or additional features that you might not know about. Typically in a computing degree, you would do something like operating systems as an example, and they give you like a good idea of the hardware and software that functions on a computer. It is very good to know about CPUs, so the central processing unit, the brains of your computer, your RAM, so where all your actual programs run, your hard drive, where all your programs are stored. Those are very, very important to understand what they are. Just as an example, I remember training one person once where they theoretically knew what a CPU, a RAM, and a hard drive was, but they didn't understand how to disconnect the hard drive from a computer. So whenever I was on a collection job with them, I looked at it, it's like, okay, well, open the computer. They didn't have any idea how to open the side of the computer. Just two little screws on the side, off it comes. So again, something that you could try at home, turn your computer off, make sure nothing's going to hurt you or anything like that. Open the side of your computer and have a look, then put it back on. The hard bits always put it back together. Of course, there's many YouTube videos to kind of go through this. Of course, have an understanding of what artifacts are, and I'll talk a little bit about what artifacts are later. For this one, I'm going to go through is called prefetch. There's also other ones like shellbags, kind of tracks where you are on a computer, like where you've been on a computer, what you've viewed through the Windows Explorer, so the little windows that you go through, your C drive, you double click on it, you go to a user, you double click on it, then you get your documents, you can track where you've been when the last time you were there. Microsoft keeps a lot of information on you, FYI. And we've got jump lists. So for example, if you look at, say, Firefox or like your internet browser, if you just right click it on your taskbar, it'll jump up and it'll tell you all the frequent websites that you've been to. Very useful for an investigator. And then you kind of wonder, why does it keep that information on me? And of course, you got the SAM file, which is security and management file. So your security file will show you like how many times someone has logged in to your computer. It also links to your event logs as well, which is very important. So yeah, there's a lot of good, juicy information that we can get from that. Okay, so on computer. Now let's have a little bit of a demo. I'll preface this with what artifacts are. I'll preface this with what the artifact does, and then I'll demonstrate what it does and what information we can get from it. And it'll take about a minute and a half. So, a guy called Dr. Edmund Lockhart, if I'm pronouncing that right, says every contact leaves a trace. That's true. When you walk in the sand, you leave footprints. And eventually those footprints fade. So we need to make sure that we get to those footprints ASAP. In the sense of a computer, it works in the same way. So artifacts sometimes are something that's been left behind that could contain information of an event or a person from the past. In digital forensics, we know these as historical artifacts, simply because they happen historically to today. So based on these findings, they can help us learn something about our future too, or the person we're investigating. So if they turn their PC on every time of the day, chances are they're going to be there tomorrow. If they did the same walk and their Fitbit said that where they've been for the last 2 weeks, they walk the park every morning with their dog or something like that, chances are, if anything happened in the park, they might have seen it because they were there. So just to give you an idea. Now, on the demo itself, prefetch files are created by the Windows operating system whenever an application is run from a specific location for the first time. And prefetch files are used to speed up the application startup process. So for example, if you open Microsoft Word, you see the little tiny box and it has all the little loading details, and eventually up pops Word. Okay? If you close it, and then it's not running anymore in your taskbar or anything like that, it's not running in your processes, if you double click it again, boom, pops up really fast, because Windows knows the offset of where that is on the drive. So instead of searching the drive for where it is, it creates a little file that simply says, yes, you go and find that there. Very easy. Now, why do we care about that? Yeah, the analysis of prefetch files reveal evidence of program execution. So simply meaning that a program ran. So you double clicked on Firefox ran. From a particular user or from a particular location. So where that location actually was. That's very, very important. Because it could have ran from a memory stick, someone could have plugged something in, ran a virus, pulled it out, and ran off. Different artifacts can show you like USB debug and whatnot, or PNP, the plug and play driver for your laptop. It could show you, what the specifics were from that, what the brand was, how big it was, the serial number of the device. So if we had 100 of them in a room, if we checked them one by one, we could actually tell which one was plugged in at that time. Prefetch files may still remain even after the program has been deleted or uninstalled. So even if you delete the program afterwards of doing this naughty thing, you actually can find it again, because prefetch files don't get deleted whenever you delete a program. You have to go and do that yourself, or use some kind of anti-forensic technique. And location is there. So it's in C on your C drive /Windows/prefetch. When you go into that folder, it'll ask you are you sure you want to look in this folder? And it'll ask you for an administrator prompt to say yes, and you can see them all. And they'll look very similar to your program's name, then a random number, and then it'll be .pf for prefetch. And if you want to learn more about these specific artifacts afterwards, I recommend checking out the SANS posters that I've linked in the future slides. All right, so let's have a look at that demo. Now, again, it's not very long. The problem is here, however, I have to take it out of full screen mode so you can actually see it, because for whatever reason, it won't play in full screen mode, so I do apologize. So if I come out of that, I take it you guys can still see my second screen. So if I just do this. Looks good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so first up, what have I got in front of me? So I have a command prompt open. My user is called Digital Forensics. It's just a test environment, or shall we say a sandbox to play in, kind of that home lab I was talking about earlier. It's very important to understand that. On the right-hand side, we can see I have some other things. So I have my program that I'm going to run. And again, it's a command line program. It doesn't have a fancy user interface or anything like that. But don't worry, I will explain it piece by piece. And then we have our prefetch files. So again, it's my C drive, Windows, prefetch. So, and you can see the names of them. Now, the program I'm going to run is called PE, Process Explorer. It shows me the actual prefetch files. So it actually decodes them. So they look like this normally. You can't read them in a text file. They're all encoded because Microsoft have them built in that specific way. But this program will decode them and give us that really good information we need. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop and drag that into here. And also, I'm going to take a copy of all these files. And then finally, I'm going to get an output of that and put it into a little CSV file. A CSV file is an open source file. It's very similar to an Excel document, and it will look like an Excel document. So I do apologize if you guys don't like Excel. So first and foremost, I'm going to go and run it. So simply enough, you can drop and drag it in. And then hit enter, and it should run. By the way, I link all these tools as well in the following slides. So first and foremost, it shows that it ran. And in the purple down below is a little error message. It says either -F or -D is required exiting. So simply what I'm doing is I'm calling the program to screen. I'm saying, hi, I'm a program. What do you want from me? And then you're going to give it some commands. So at the very top here, we have D and F. So D will let us look at a directory recursively, simply meaning that everything is at a folder. Or we can use file, F, which simply lets us look at one file. So if we want to specifically look at this very specific one I've highlighted, we can just look at that one. But I've told it to run all 160 items instead, because I just want all of them for whatever reason. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly put our thing back in. So that's our command. And again, all this is simply, it's my user digital forensics desktop inside a folder called CMD tools, and the program is pcmd.exe. I then want to set up my target. So I'm going to type -D, and again, -D at the very top says directory. So it's going to take everything from a folder. I'm going to put it in quotes. So therefore, any spaces or any issues, Windows won't go, oh, I don't know where that is. I can't find that folder. Just put it in double quotes. And I'm going to grab the C Windows prefetch, which I talked about earlier. So I'm going to take everything in there and paste it in here. So currently, what it will do is it will take everything, it will search this directory, and it will pull them all apart and show me that in the command line, which is helpful, but not ideal, because when I close that command line, all the information is gone. So what I need to do is export that. So I do to something. So I'm going to use a CSV, and it specifically asks me to make sure it's in double quotes. So again, a CSV is a comma separated variable or a comma separated value. And the idea is that it uses commas to denounce whenever the next row in a spreadsheet or a column of a spreadsheet is needed. So for example, if it's going to dump everything into like column 1A at the very top left corner, and everything's going to be in there, like all thousands of lines of code, that's no good to anybody. But if we do it by the commas or maybe tab, a TSV, tab separated variable instead, it'll actually put them row by row by row, which makes it much easier for a human to understand. So I'm going to do -CSV, and I'm going to put the output folder, and the output folder is in the bottom right. Now, I would say you're going to see a lot of code on screen. So if people have any issues of seeing a lot of images flashing up and down very quickly, I'll just give you fair warning. It will be about 14 seconds long, and I'll mention specifically whenever this is over. Okay, so here we go. 3, 2, 1. So it looks like something from the Matrix. Might look a bit funny on a Zoom, I have to admit. So it's pulling apart all those rows of information. And done. Okay, so now you can look. So in the end, it did 146 files that it could pull apart, and it done it in 13.65 seconds. Damn, that's quick. It's a lot quicker than I can. So yeah, very, very useful. And it output 2 files in purple. We can see there's 2 CSV files. I put it to C Windows, blah, 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 output, and then it's date and time, and then the output plus the timeline output. Now, the output we're going to specifically look at is simply just the output itself, or the raw output. Now, I'm using OpenOffice, and the reason for this is that OpenOffice lets me specify what kind of encoding I want to use for this document. Now, as you can see in the little standard box in the middle, there is a lot of information is really scrunched together. I don't know how well you can see it on your screen, but the idea is that it isn't very user-friendly. So what I'm going to do, because the CSV, it's a comma-separated file, I'm going to click on that, and all of a sudden, it looks much nicer and much easier to read. So I'm happy with that, and I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. Now, don't worry, I'll explain what this is. So first, I'm going to go find that program that I ran. So again, pecmd.exe. We can see quite a few things about it, that it came from Windows 10, it has a specific hash value, the program itself is called pecmd.exe, and you can see all the ones like FTK imager above it. If you're into forensics, we'll talk about that a little later on. You can see disk defrag has been used on this, so on and so forth, like an autopsy. Anyway, so we can see that this particular program has been ran 6 times. So it says here on run count, it ran 6 times. And these are the previous times that it ran. So you can actually tell whenever someone ran a program and how many times they ran it. Now, Windows does have some limitations to this. It only shows the last 7 or 8 times, minus 10 seconds for the actual real time. So it isn't 100% perfect. But the key bit is it gives you some information. Someone says, well, I only ran it once by accident and deleted it. But if it shows timestamps are like, from 5 years ago, 3 years ago, today, they know what it is. They've had it for 5 years. So that kind of stuff is quite useful. So in this scenario, you can see it ran 6 times, and it ran today, the 17th of the 2nd, 2022. It's backwards. The time I ran it at was 15:04.36. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. But yeah, that's kind of just the things that we have a look at. All right, so let me just go back to the presentation. And setup will be the next one. And slideshow from current slide. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea about how this actually kind of goes. It's quite cool. But now we're going to have a look at the home lab setup. So why build a home lab? So home labs offer a unique chance to craft a custom learning environment. And I cannot be any more stressful about this. Custom learning environment, custom to you, what you want to learn. So the environment can be self-hosted on your PC or in the cloud. But I said earlier, the AWS, the Amazon Web Services, or Azure for Microsoft, they can come with large costs when doing so. A Raspberry Pi is a good option. I'd recommend one of the later ones because they have more RAM in them and a slightly better processor. This can be a fantastic tool to build your skills and show a potential employer that there is low risk to hiring you. Remember, everyone gets hired in a business has some form of risk, regardless of who you are. There's a chance something might go wrong. But if you can mitigate that risk and look very, shall we say, enticing, because you've got a portfolio, you've got your own home lab, you can talk about it. Your employer may not even ask you to do a technical test. So it might actually save you a lot of time. Okay, so how does this work? Typically, you will need a computer that will be able to run 2 operating systems at once, so a host and a guest. So what that means is that on the right-hand side, we have the host hardware. Now, the host hardware is in gray. So that is simply your laptop in this scenario. Your host operating system is Windows. I'm running Windows currently. Your hypervisor is a bit of software that lets you have another operating system inside of that again. And then you can see 3 examples here. They've got 3 little operating systems and then the applications from those operating systems. You don't need to run 3 or anything like that, but it's just as an example. So software details for all this included in the next section. So what I recommend you have, if you happen to have a laptop running this or a PC, at least 4 cores and 8 threads for your processor. Ideally more, but this is like the minimum you want. So that gives you 2 cores to run Windows on both sides, because the minimum requirement for Windows to run. If you're running Linux, it requires much, much less. You should be able to run Linux no problem. I recommend 16 gigs of memory. purely because if you think about it, you're running 2 operating systems. Windows has a minimum requirement of 4 gig to run. And if anyone has ran Google Chrome or Firefox, you may realize that those things take 1 or 2 gigabytes just to load YouTube. So if you're watching a tutorial on one thing and then you're doing your work on the other, you're going to need at least 6, 7, 8 gigs immediately from that. So I recommend 16 gigs. They usually come in 2 8-gig sticks, so they do. I also recommend an SSD, solid state hard drive. Simply means that there's spinning hard drives, they're moving parts, called HDDs or hard drives. And they're a bit older nowadays. Nowadays, you should be able to, every laptop you should buy, every PC you should get will come with a solid state drive. They're much faster. They're 2 to 10 times faster at least. And if you're running multiple operating systems and they need to check stuff, it's always good that you have a little extra headroom to breathe. You won't get stutters and whatnot. Another thing, of course, having 2 screens. 2 screens is extremely important. And again, if you haven't got 2 screens, not a problem. I'm sure somewhere in your house you've got a TV. Buy an HDMI cable and plug it in, because I did it for years because I couldn't afford a second screen as a student. So again, definitely a good place to start up. I link all of the things here for each one. So if you see any images I've used, they're all linked to the sites and explains them a little more in detail. So definitely check them out if it's something you're interested in. All right, free tools. So we got VirtualBox. So remember we talked about a hypervisor and something that would actually hold your new operating system that you're going to play in, like your little sandbox. VirtualBox is one of those. It's a fantastic piece of software. It's completely free. It's open source, made by Oracle. They make like one of the world's best databases you can get. And again, it's completely free. So software allows you to have an operating system nested inside of your current one. This is what we call a sandbox. You can install any tools you want, change specifics such as turning your antivirus off if you're doing specifically malware work and you're going to some settings you have to change to make sure it doesn't leak into your main PC. Again, loads of tutorials on YouTube for that. I link some as well, so you shouldn't have too much problems there. Or you can change your network settings, so you can like run proxies and stuff like that. It's quite cool. And of course, they allow something which is the most important thing, snapshots. So think about you have a clean computer and everything is great, and you go file, snapshot. And then say you install some stuff and I don't know, your PC's running really slow and you maybe did something you shouldn't have, or someone did something and you had a virus. You literally just go file, snapshot, enter, and it gets rid of everything that happened from that time that snapshot was taken to now, and takes you all the way back to a clean, beautiful operating system. And that's very, very handy. So you can test something over and over again and get the same result over and over again, just like the ACPO principles ask you to, and just like how you have to scientifically in digital forensics. So it's definitely worth doing. We also have some other types. Now I've labeled this imaging software because I use the imaging software on it. It's called Geimager. Yeah, weird name. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So Kali is an open source cybersecurity operating system. I think it's likely the most well-known one. It can be used for penetration testing, so hacking, ethical hacking that you have permission for, FYI. Wi-Fi hacking, so you can hack your own Wi-Fi network to say how secure it is. Or digital forensics, because it has a digital forensics section. The operating system itself is Linux-based, so again, it can give you a good kind of introduction to Linux. And again, has a range of digital forensic software built into it. It's got some popular hex editors, and of course, Geimager, which is for imaging. And I'll go over what that is now. After SIFT. So SIFT is a workstation specifically for forensics. It's one of the best that you can get. It's completely free as also. It's a full operating system. So instead of you running around after this presentation and going and downloading all these different softwares, just go get the operating system. It has everything in it. It auto updates. Sounds pretty good. You can even run it from a memory stick. So you don't need to install anything. So it's an open source incident response and forensic tool designed to perform detailed forensic analysis and examinations in a variety of settings. So it can be done live forensics. It can do static forensics. It's like data that's always changing and moving, or data that's been turned off. SIFT demonstrates the advanced incident response capabilities and deep dive digital forensic techniques. Again, this is from their marketing stuff. And uses cutting edge open source tools that are freely available, frequently updated, and links with Remnux. Remnux is really good. I love Remnux. And again, you can find more information from sans.org, which they talk about it. So Remnox is a Linux-based toolkit. And again, similar to SIFT, where it's a full operating system and full suite of software. It does reverse engineering and analyzing malicious content. Remnox provides a curated list of free tools from the community, and it's specifically for investigating malware. So this is very, very good if you want to go down that route. I recommend it. There's also Flare, which is a Windows-based one. Flare VM is from FireEye, who are a well-known cybersecurity company. So you can check that out too if you want a Windows-based one. But Remnox is definitely great. So going back to imaging, we have FTK Imager. It's widely used, open source. Effectively, FTK is a company that, or Forensic Toolkit, they're a company that has been doing forensic software for years. Imager is great. It's software that lets you copy all addressable data from a device that is connected to your computer. So just because you've got two hard drives that are identical and you copy one to the other doesn't mean everything will come over from this hard drive. Excuse me. The important stuff will be any damaged areas of a hard drive or impurities, because not every computer is made the same, not every hard drive is made the same, even if the same brands. So you might have some issues there. It'll take all of the data from a hard drive or a computer hard drive or a phone, and it will put it into something called an EO1 file, an evidence file. And an EO1 file, think of it like a zip file. And the zip file itself keeps all the information of one whole computer in this one little file. It keeps all the metadata. So the metadata itself is like all the information about all those files, where they were, who made them, when they were created, when they were deleted, all the information specifically kept in that. And it's read-only. So you can pull files out, you can analyze it with FTK Imager or other forensic suites like Autopsy. And yeah, that file won't go anywhere. You can verify the information quite easily too. It comes with a little text file. So it does, you can verify the information with. So this, again, lets you safely search potentially relevant data to potentially find some evidence. And again, there's a guide on this from eForensics. I linked it here. So again, please do check it out. And then finally, we have Zimmerman's tools. So one of the tools I used previously for the prefetch parser is actually from Eric Zimmerman. So he is a forensic specialist. He's created many, many tools to help us in our daily jobs. They're all free. You just grab it from the site. The site contains many tools, including prefetch parser, which is in the demo, and can be downloaded using a script in PowerShell that I talked about earlier, or you can get them just one by one if you need them. Mostly they're command line based, like you saw, but some of them do have a graphical user interface or a GUI, so it's pretty in that sense. It looks like a normal application you might see. We then also have GitHub. GitHub is a great place for digital forensics tools. It has its own little hashtag, and there's 130 repositories of information that you can go get. What's great about GitHub is that a lot of people review for them. You can see if they're really good or not. You can look at their hashtags to see if there's anything good with them. So DFIR, Digital Forensic Incident Response, free is another good one, because I don't recommend paying for anything at all, because there's no point you paying hundreds or thousands of pounds for these tools, because they're not going to benefit you at all. You're best learning it this way than that way. So yeah, definitely check it out. The link's there. There's plenty of really cool things. Now, just because you have a sandbox, just because you have software, doesn't actually mean that it's actually any good to you, because you haven't got any evidence to actually deal with, right? So where are we going to get our evidence from? So NIST has a computer reference dataset portal. So simply it's a portal online made by large manufacturers like Celebrite, for example. NIST make their own stuff. There's plenty of places. Digital Corpora, which we'll talk about later, also is here. They will create evidence files for like iOS, Windows, some database stuff for like a SQLite database or Blue Ink databases. So they come from your Firefox or Chrome or whatever. So definitely worth doing. And they also usually come with descriptions. So they have finding aids to help you locate data sets by the year produced, the author, and the attributes of the data set. So the attributes being, how big it is, what specifics it is. There's drone forensics, for example, which is really cool. So you can learn about where a drone's been, but also what video it's taken, what pictures it's taken. how long it was turned on for, when it was turned off. Very useful information. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. Of course, you've got Digital Corpora. So it's a website for computer forensics education. All the images, memory dumps, network packet captures, so PCAP files and whatnot are completely free, and you should definitely check it out. They also have a research corpus of real data acquired from the world. Again, use the data set. You can use it. You just got to write to them and say, hi, I want to use this for a research project or something like that. Might be really good for your final project, for example. And there's a link there, check it out. And then finally, we're going to talk about some learning resources. So ENSA, if I'm pronouncing that right, sorry, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity is a great resource for learning digital forensics. So the guide shows you what tools, pre-built virtual machines, and evidence that you can use. There's even guides specifically there, and it even gives you a time kind of indication of how long it might take you to do the actual task. So it's quite useful. Some of them, as you can see up on the right here, there's a handbook, tool sets, so what tools you're going to use, virtual image, so creates a virtual machine for you so you can play with. You've got Windows Tools, Windows Cuckoo, which is the Cuckoo Sandbox. You've also got below it a slightly easier one, some tools, virtual machines, the handbook, and how long they take. I'd also say the time commitments might be slightly higher on your first attempt because you don't know what you're doing. But again, something definitely to have a go at if you wanted to have a look at this kind of work. And finally, we have SANS. So SANS have many posters and cheat sheets. I've used them for years. Other places I've worked with have used them for years. I give them to my students often. This is kind of like a big poster for a DFIR, for example, the Digital Forensics Instant Response poster. And it tells you about all the latest things about digital forensics. Artifacts, what they do, how they work, what Windows uses them for originally, and then what we use them for. So again, it's extremely, extremely important to know. There's also cheat sheets as well, so you can actually learn about this kind of stuff, which is really cool. The posters are completely free. You do need to sign up for them though. So just sign up, make an account, verify your email, and then have fun downloading. All right, conclusion time. So we went through what digital forensics is and its various flavors of cyber forensics. We've seen the roles that you potentially could go into. I've talked about advice for starting, building your own home lab, making sure that everything is up and running, building a portfolio, and how to actually go about doing that, sorry. I've talked about some of the soft and hard skills you need to succeed. So of course, all these are very useful. You might not have all of them right away. That's fine. Everything's a learning process. We will get there eventually. Tools, they're all free. Never pay for anything. I mean that in a non-pirate way. Obviously they're free tools. Evidence samples, so you guys can check all that stuff out. And finally, some resources, so you guys can have a look at all the things. So yeah, effectively, that's the end of my presentation. Thanks very much. If you guys got any questions, I'm very happy to go through them. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much. It was absolutely brilliant.